Hello and welcome to the Empower Couples podcast, where here you get modern, non-boring relationship advice for you and your partner to communicate like pros, fight smarter, and stay on the same team no matter the challenge that you face. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman.
And I'm Jocelyn Freeman, but you all just know us as the Freemans.
And this episode is Who's to Blame? Determining your part in marriage issues.
Well, your partner is definitely the one to blame. That's for sure. It's
That would just end that podcast right here.
That's what this episode's going to be about. Your partner is the villain. They're wrong and you should leave them. No, that's not obviously our message. But naturally, in our private sessions with couples, we'll see that a recurring issue, frustration, problem in the relationship keeps happening and they keep pointing the finger at each other. And you can stay stuck there forever, right? You can feel like, gosh, we keep encountering this again, or this always causes the conflict, or we don't repair for days because we're constantly pointing the finger at each other. And the tricky thing with emotions is that emotions really can cloud our mind. Number one, our memory is not as good when we're experiencing strong emotion, and we're very biased in our own favor. But we can also use that emotion that we're feeling to then drive our actions and continue to blame them. This wouldn't happen anymore if you changed. And we're going to really dismantle this and have you see things differently so that you can ultimately have the breakthrough that you two want in the relationship.
And are we saying that your partner doesn't have any responsibility? No, definitely not. Did they play a role in this event? Likely, yes, right? There's two of you, and that's just the thing to get over initially. That part just doesn't matter as much as you starting to take some ownership of the actions that got you here. That is really the foundation of getting into repair. This podcast is not about repair, but your ownership and your willingness to take responsibility is how you actually get on the path to repair. But prior to that is this thoughtful process about, well, I could stand here and I can continue to blame my partner, or I can begin to look at myself and the actions that got us here, got me here. And that's just going to be a much more foundational, much more effective way for you to approach problem solving, which I might as well just dive right into there, right? Relationships are bi-directional, and I know there was more you wanted to say on this, but from a social psychology perspective broadly about relationships, as well as romantic relationships, but neuroscience, neuropsychology, and even metaphysics, which is, we're not going to spend a lot of time here, but everything is relational. How we relate to things is everything. Like our mind is built on that. We talked about schemas. We talked about categorization of objects. And then what our mind does is really just compare things. And even in physics, right, it's up doesn't exist without down, hot without cold, dark without light. And so the way that we experience or interact with things, let alone give language to describe things, doesn't exist without a certain relationship between multiple things. So to kick us off, I did want to talk about the psychology side of this. Problem solving is really interesting because when you get down to it, I think that's what we're really talking about. Like there's problem solving. You're in a marriage, you're a partner, you're up against a problem or an issue. And it's like, well, how do we solve this? Well, if you realize that problem solving from a psychology standpoint is defined by an initial state and then a goal state. And in between those, you have to have an evaluation between a time when the answer is not clear to you on how to reach the goal state. Now, I think that's really interesting because if you know the answer to a problem, then you're not problem solving. This idea of problem solving requires for you to not know an answer. So initial state and goal state, and then you end up where an object gets in your way, and that creates confusion and anxiety.
That's where people get stuck.
That's exactly where people get stuck, especially for partners in a marriage. Now, what is needed is that in that confusion, in that unknown state, is you have to be creative. You have to evaluate what got me here, because you could also say, well, what worked and what didn't work. And then you have to try something else out to start to progress you in the direction of the goal state. And I know we're saying this very objectively, and it's clear that this is not what happens when a couple gets into the confused or anxious state, because they don't evaluate where I myself took actions that led us here, let alone what did our team, our partnership do to get us here. We're not evaluating on the path, what is our goal state? Did we forget what our goal state was? Like, what are we even doing this for? Let alone then what actions could we try out to see if that works or not, and then we'll reevaluate again. You have anxiety and confusion come up, and then you just blame your partner for where you're at.
Yep.
The rest of the problem solving is literally out the window. So you're not doing anything that's effective or creative or even useful at this point. You're not problem solving.
I love that you said that. And I was just thinking about how many times in sessions we have stopped couples from just going, they're firing back and forth at each other. And we go, wait. Because we are not afraid to intervene. We don't just let couples argue in front of us. And we will say, do you realize you're literally just talking at each other? You are not even trying to solve a problem right now. And it's because they're acting from that emotion. Now, I want to go back really quickly to the quick point you made about relationships being bi-directional, because what you were just describing is so great about that initial state and goal state, which can be easier when you're trying to tackle something like your career goals or an issue with your health, right? Or something you can do independently. Now, fortunately/unfortunately, relationships truly do take two to tango. That overused phrase is really true, because truly relationships are bi-directional, meaning you really do affect each other's actions, feelings, choices. And just think of that. Okay, the attitude I wake up with, my energy, the way I talk to my partner, how I say it, how I'm being, affects the way they receive that and will affect how they feel and their mood and their attitude and their actions and their choices, which then affect me back. And we talk about this a lot on episodes of how you're either creating like a positive momentum or negative momentum. But it doesn't make sense to blame one person. That's kind of the punchline of this whole podcast episode, is that it doesn't make sense sociology-wise, psychology-wise, to blame just one person because of how much you affect each other. Now, a great team, even in sports, we refer to sports often, it really does require both of you to say, we both want to get better. We both want to achieve that goal state, like you said, which in a marriage, it's hopefully more connection, closeness, intimacy, fulfillment, joy, being able to overcome challenges together. And we are a team. We're both playing a role. We both want to get better. And as we go into this next stage of this episode, we're going to give you some more tangible ways to identify as a team and get into that problem solving state as you just described, rather than staying in this cyclical, pointing the finger, not getting anywhere kind of dynamic, which is really frustrating and discouraging.
It's definitely not a logical from here to there in terms of problem solving. And again, I think it's interesting to note that if you had the answer, you're not problem solving. So therein kind of lies an issue, is that you have to be more accepting and open, especially as a partnership, to exist in confusion, to exist in unknown, to exist in a level of tension and or anxiety together, and just seeing how easy it is to then blame the other partner. So it's really about knowing, what do we need to do next? Not like, what do we need to do to achieve this goal? It's like, you're only really going to know the next thing. And sometimes a part of that is to step off maybe the overall path and say, well, the next step is to repair, because we can't just say, well, let's just do this and then do this. Part of what you need to do is take responsibility for how your actions have impacted your partner, and sometimes sit with them being able to share things that may bring up the past, because there's likely other things from the past that haven't been repaired, and that's maybe your big obstacle in this moment. It actually transitions us pretty well to wanting to have you look at 5 root causes of conflict or problems that we've identified for couples. Yeah. And I'll go a little bit out of order, starting with probably the one I should have done at the very end, but that's sometimes your cause of conflict is going to be something that's unrepaired from the past.
Exactly. So just to explain that a little bit, let's say you don't repair an argument or multiple arguments or something like a little bit bigger of a rupture that occurs, and you just get busy, or you think, oh, business, back to business as usual. It's going to come up later at some point. Ever notice that, right? That it gets brought up, whether it's a week later, a month later, a year later, it gets said at some point because we remember those things in our mind, in our body. And so if you notice, okay, we started arguing and it was about the fork, right? Why did it get so intense about the dishes? Obviously, it's not about the dishes. And so you're exactly right. One of the 5, and we're going to explain all 5 briefly, of the root causes is you didn't repair something else. And now it's coming up in this unrelated situation.
And I would say if we were to think of this as sort of a journey, right, maybe that's better because it's not a straight line. Like think about being on a path, like on a hike. You're not necessarily going to know which way the path is going to turn, but you need to recognize that in these moments, that here you are, had initial state, goal state, but you're in the middle of confusion and you need to evaluate. Well, what do you want to evaluate? Well, what's likely the root cause here? And if you came to this, quote unquote, fork in the road, that's like, you know what? I think my reaction here was because I'm actually unresolved from something. It's like, that's where you need to pause. You can't just keep going down this path. Your next step is to say, well, let's pause here by this rock, by this stream, if you stay with my hiking analogy, and let's have a conversation for repair.
Exactly.
And obviously, you know us about repair, the 5 R's. You can find that in guides in our book and all that. So that would be what you would need to do.
Because you have to master the ability to repair. That's why we're going to reference it for the rest of our lives, is because it can wreak havoc in your interactions, in your relationship. Now, another of the 5 root causes that can really come up, and again, this is you thinking from a problem-solving perspective, is an unexpressed or unmet expectation. Now, expectations, people can often think, no, the secret to happiness, I heard it was don't have expectations of people, and then you'll be happy. That might be a nice ideal, but it's not practical, especially in a marriage. And you'll hear us say this on episodes because you better bet I'm going to have expectations of my partner who I'm building a life with, raising children with, sharing my finances with, who is the number one person to affect me and influence me in my life. I am going to realistically have quote unquote expectations, but they aren't commands. It's not about it's about win-win based on the life we want to build, the kind of marriage, how we want to model this for our kids. Here's what we mutually expect of each other, and it's through communication. And again, we're not barking at each other. We're not saying, here's my expectation of you. It's really through a constructive conversation of who we want to be, what we expect of each other. And you have to realize that your brain is coming up with expectations all the time. Before a trip, you're envisioning one thing. Maybe you're envisioning just relaxing, laying there, sleeping in, not really doing much, reading magazines or books. And your partner is envisioning adventure. Like, let's get up early. Let's go hike the volcano. And I want to make sure we exercise still every day. Your brain is creating expectations all the time because it wants to predict. It wants to predict, prevent, and be able to identify what I want, what I don't want.
And you've heard us talk about expectations a number of times now, certainly on this podcast. And so it can be things around parenting and, sleep training, sleep learning, potty learning, finances, intimacy. So I want to create the visual. Maybe this is the part we haven't done before. Since we're on this quote unquote analogy path of being on a hike, being on a journey, you're going to start out with some expectations. It's going to be sunny. Most of the path is going to be dry. So you're going to prepare as best you can. But when you get out onto the hike, you're going to encounter things that you would have no idea that you could have planned for. Say your shoe falls off, or you have to walk through a part of a river and your shoes and clothes get wet, or you get a hole in your backpack and your food fell out. So halfway into the hike, it's like you're out of food. Or rain comes and you thought the forecast said, sunny skies. This is a part of life. So when we say expectations, we don't just mean the things that you expect your partner to be and act with you. You have to really have this stance that as you go through life, like going on this path, you're going to encounter things that you wouldn't have been able to see, and you're going to have to adjust your expectations.
Yeah.
Now, from an emotional standpoint too, it's like your emotional needs are going to change as you grow together, as circumstances in your life evolve. Again, like parenting or financial, professional, intimacy, like you have to see that expectations are always going to change. You have to adjust.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to reevaluate. That's what the decision making and problem solving is.
Mm-hmm.
An evaluation of where are we, what needs are unmet, what needs do we need to meet, what things do we need to try out if we're going to continue down the path towards our future goal. And sometimes life gets really hard and you have to evaluate, maybe I don't want to hike this direction anymore. Maybe I don't even like hiking. Maybe I want to be driving. So that's a real strong adjustment on your value system and your value structure, because that's the place that all of our cognitive function comes from, and our behavior is all driven from what we value. And that would be a longer conversation, but just take that if you can for the basis that everything is driven by value. It's just, are we evaluating them on a short, medium, long-term basis, and based on, I know we're in this expectations root cause. So unmet expectations along this journey are definitely going to be one of the root causes.
Absolutely. The third common root cause of issues, problems in your relationship would be emotional triggers. We all have them. We're human. And it's just I call it, it's like your just sensitive spot, right? It's just, we all have that little sensitive, vulnerable spot on our bodies, in our hearts, that we're going to poke from time to time, whether we intentionally or unintentionally do. And so when you marry your partner, you don't just marry their strengths, their positive qualities, how hardworking, how attractive you thought they were, funny, the parent you thought they'd be. They also have their triggers, their sensitive spots, and we have to have some acceptance of that, some empathy, some understanding, and be able to navigate them. And as a team, say, okay, I understand your triggers and you understand mine, and how do we support each other in that? Not by avoiding them, but by saying, is it around agreements? Is it around some expectations, for example, being really clear, but also identifying closer to the time when you get triggered, that you are triggered, that it's your responsibility for how you still choose to act in those moments, right? We can't use our triggers as excuses. So that's the third one. Going to the fourth one, it would be a low love account. Now, you've heard us probably talk about this on different episodes, but people ask us every day on social media, can you explain more about the love account if they haven't heard our episodes? And really just think of it kind of like a bank account. So it's the sum of your deposits and your withdrawals to each other's love account, which then represents how connected you feel, how loved you feel, and it's evolving all the time. It's not like, oh, we went on a vacation, that was a huge 10 out of 10 deposit. Okay, that was 3 months ago. The deposits and the withdrawals are occurring on a daily basis. It's every interaction between the two of you. That's the way we think of it, at least, is I want to think of every interaction, whether we're in the kitchen, we're passing each other in the hallway, we're in the bathroom, we're on the phone. Was that a deposit or was that a withdrawal from my partner? Now, we describe that in many resources. We've got that in our family meeting guide. We have that in our 30-day couples challenge. We have episodes on it specifically. So we're not going to do a deep dive, but when you are making more withdrawals than deposits, you're going to feel it. And that is something we for sure see both people play a part in, because it's like, okay, I make that remark. Then you get defensive with me a minute later. And then I get even more frustrated, which then has you get more snappy back to me. And so you just snowball effect of withdrawal. And suddenly it's been 3 days. You're feeling so disconnected. You feel like it's been terrible interactions. And then a huge blowout fight happens. And then you blame the other person. Well, it was because of that remark you made to me. It was because your tone. Okay, yeah, that's one of many withdrawals that you both were making back and forth to each other.
Yeah, with a low love account, you're just more reactive. You have less grace. You have less receptivity for one another. And it's what has you get into that 0 to 60 place, right? Or that it's been defined as quick startup. That all I did was make one simple comment with like a level 1 or level 2 level of tone, and now we're in this huge argument. And many of these, I think, go back to where's your love account at? And if you haven't been focusing on that, you're probably at a 2. So yes, you're going to be more reactive to one another.
Yeah.
So those are the first 4. And this last one, this 5th one, I think has aspects that are in each of those 4. So the last one here is that the 5th root cause of conflict is a broken promise. Now, if we go back to summarize these, we have something unrepaired from the past, and a part of the repair process has to do with making agreements. You have unexpressed, unmet expectations, and a part of that process has to do with coming to win-win agreements on what you need to do to help fulfill the expressed need for your partner. Love accounts. It's like there's definitely a set of agreements and understandings of what love deposits to make to your partner. And then with emotional triggers, as well as withdrawals, it's like there's a level of agreement on, hey, when you say this or do this, that's a withdrawal from me, or that's a trigger for one of my, core wounds. So there's a place you want to make some agreements around too. So at the end of the day, even if you did and address those 4 things, but you don't follow through, that might be another way to simply put this one, is a cause of conflict would be not following through on what you said you were going to do, which is an agreement or a promise in regard to any of these 4 other things.
And no one expects you to be flawless and perfect with maybe little forgotten things from time to time, but overall the trend. Can your partner rely on you? Let's just call it like 98.5% of the time, right? Just to give you an arbitrary number to really conceptualize what's my track record with my partner. Is it more of an exception when I forget or don't do it, or I kind of default back to my patterns, for example? So truly, what's the trend? Can your partner, the majority of the time, rely on you, count on you, that when you say blank, blank happens? Or if you don't, you own up to it. That's another thing that can really derail couples is they come to you, you did forget or you didn't do it, and then you turn it around on them, or you have excuses and you defend. No, if you didn't do it, or if you defaulted to the old pattern, just own up to it, acknowledge it, and then reestablish the promise. It's when you then go and fight for why you didn't follow through, why you didn't keep your word and your promise. Now, those are the 5 root causes, and we're going to give you 4 reflective questions that you can really use to see what's my part in this. Because again, the punchline of this entire thing is that you can't blame it on just one of you because of how bi-directional relationships are, how much you affect each other. Now, what's really cool about those 5 root causes is every single one of those plus more get addressed in our Rebuilding Us 30-Day Couples Challenge. So for those of you who are newer here, we actually have 2 couples challenges. The first one being prioritizing us. And we had over 25,000 couples love that one so much and constantly ask us for another round of prompts that we created a level 2, so even more challenging, Rebuilding Us challenge. And in that, you not only address all 5 of these through very constructive and methodical prompts that you guys can have, and we coach you through it in written form, but 5 more, because we have 10 core themes, and truly it is absolutely incredible what you will accomplish in those 30 days by using these prompts that we provide for you with reflective prompts, conversation prompts, and then foundation builders, because it's all about the foundation of your partnership. So either go to the link in the show notes, or it's mycoupleschallenge.com/rebuilding, because then it won't be just hearing this episode and being like, oh yeah, that's a good idea to talk about that. No, we're going to guide you through it with, again, productive, constructive prompts every single day for 30 days. So go to mycoupleschallenge.com/rebuilding. With that, Aaron, will you dive into the 4 self-reflective questions?
Yeah, the first one is an obvious one, and that's going to be asking yourself, well, which of these 5 root causes of conflict that we just covered is occurring for us? And what was my role in that?
Absolutely. Second is, how do my actions or attitudes affect/influence my partner? Because think about that. Like truly, my choices are then influencing their choices. And that really puts you in a more thoughtful, productive place. The next one is, what am I not seeing because it would be looking at one of my shadows? So just quick explainer for that, because it's a big topic. Our shadows are the parts of ourselves we don't want to look at. It can even be the traits that we want to deny, we don't like it about ourselves, we feel shame about, or that we could feel judged. And so we actually have to turn and look at the shadow, look at those parts of ourselves that we don't like and would want to defend and deny. So again, what am I not seeing because it would be looking at one of my shadows? Then lastly, how could I see this situation differently if I expanded my perspective? Because you might be so zoned in on one thing they're doing, one thing that's occurring, rather than you zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture of your relationship, your life dynamics, and again, even referring to these 5 root causes, and what do we need to do for our relationship? So there's a lot in here. This is one you really want to do some deeper reflection on, because it can truly and radically make a big change in your relationship if you use this framework for problem solving. Again, you're not going to get anywhere if you continue to point the finger at each other or continue to just say, oh, I just hope this problem disappears. No, you have to get into action. You have to be taking responsibility and saying, we're going to do something about this. We're going to break the cycle and overcome this together as a team. And we really want our episodes to be valuable for you. And if you want to take it to the next level, dive into our resources that really give you the ways to put this into action and practice. So our Rebuilding Us Level 2 challenge would be incredible. That's linked in the show notes. And if you haven't done our other challenge, the Prioritizing Us, you could certainly start there. But we have guides. I mean, if you're new here, you guys, we have a guide for it all. A guide for repair, a guide for family meeting, and we make them all very reasonable investments so that they're accessible for everyone to apply to their relationship. But with that, we love you guys, and we will talk to you on the next episode.